Have you ever wondered how royal women in the past survived their periods while trapped in those massive, suffocating puffy dresses? What if I told you their solutions were so disturbing, so shocking, that they'd leave you speechless? This is not just history. It's a glimpse into the horrifying reality of beauty, power, and pain that royal women endured in silence. Centuries ago, life inside royal courts looked glamorous from the outside: shimmering gowns, glittering jewels, grand feasts. But beneath those layers of silk and lace lay a secret no one dared talk about. Royal women were expected to look flawless at all times, regardless of what their bodies were going through. Periods weren't seen as natural, they were treated as shameful, inconvenient, even disgusting. But these women had no choice. They had to hide the truth of their pain beneath those suffocating gowns. Corsets so tight they could barely breathe, and endless layers of skirts that weighed as much as a child. Imagine this: a young queen, sitting on her throne, smiling gracefully at her court, while underneath her gown, blood is pooling against makeshift cloth pads, tied uncomfortably between her legs, soaking through layer after layer. She couldn't excuse herself. She couldn't show discomfort. And in some cases, she wasn't even allowed to leave the throne until the ceremony ended. So, how did they survive this nightmare? The answer is chilling. Royal women often used bundles of rags and strips of old fabric, crudely tied together, to absorb the flow. There were no adhesives, no modern hygiene products, nothing comfortable. These makeshift pads would chafe their skin raw. Sometimes, they were stuffed with wool, moss, or even scraps of animal fur when fabric was scarce. But here's where it gets even worse. Many gowns had so many layers that changing was nearly impossible during the day. They would be forced to sit through banquets and ceremonies while wearing blood-soaked undergarments, with the stench hidden only by overwhelming perfumes. But the horror didn't end there. In France during the 16th century, some royal women wore period belts, tight, leather straps designed to hold rags in place. These belts were painfully constricting, digging into their skin, and often caused bruising and infection. Imagine being bound so tightly that even walking felt like punishment. And what about cramps? Forget herbal teas or rest. Royal women were given strange remedies, like being told to burn herbs in their chambers and inhale the smoke, or worse, to drink concoctions of wine mixed with crushed insects or metallic powders, believing it would balance the humors of their body. These so-called cures often did nothing, or made them even sicker. Now picture this: a young princess during her coronation. Layers of fabric, a crown on her head, and an audience staring at her every move. She feels the familiar warmth between her legs, but she can't excuse herself. She sits frozen, her body trembling, terrified that someone might see a stain. Her ladies-in-waiting, trained to handle such discreet matters, would sometimes slip cloths under her skirts during public events without anyone noticing, an act done silently in the shadows of etiquette and secrecy, but nothing could prepare you for the most shocking practice of all: the use of petticoat buckets. In some royal courts, women wore dresses so voluminous that beneath them, a small bucket or absorbent cushion would be placed so they wouldn't have to change all day. It was unhygienic, humiliating, and dehumanizing, but appearances mattered more than comfort. The dress had to stay pristine, even if their dignity didn't. Blood would sometimes leak into the padding and remain there for hours, causing unbearable itching, rashes, and infections. Yet, they endured it with painted smiles, because to complain was to risk being labeled weak or unfit for royalty. This is just the beginning of their nightmare. Because in part 2, you'll learn about the even darker, more humiliating secrets, including the disturbing roles servants played, the dangerous poisons used as cures, and how royal women risked their very lives just to hide something as natural as menstruation. If you thought the struggles of royal women during their periods ended with crude cloth rags and suffocating dresses, brace yourself. The reality gets far worse, descending into shocking, humiliating practices that reveal how cruel royal life truly was. Behind the towering palace walls, secrecy was everything. Periods were never spoken of aloud, not even among the royal family. Instead, they became a silent ritual dealt with in shadows. But these shadows hid disturbing truths. Servants, often young women known as ladies-in-waiting, were forced to manage their mistress's menstrual needs with meticulous care. Their duty wasn't glamorous. It was invasive and dehumanizing. They would kneel beneath those massive skirts, changing soiled cloths in near total silence, sometimes even during court events, unseen but ever present. For these servants, it was an honor to serve, but for the women they attended, it was nothing short of humiliation disguised as etiquette. And then there was the fear, the unbearable fear of staining. Royal gowns cost fortunes and were symbols of dignity and power. A single bloodstain could lead to whispers, mockery, and even political scandal. To prevent this, women were told to bleed less by using bizarre and dangerous remedies. One of the most horrific methods? They drank concoctions of lead-based powders and mercury mixtures, believing they would dry the womb and stop the flow. Instead, these toxic drinks slowly poisoned them, leading to weakness, hair loss, and even organ damage, all because they were desperate to avoid embarrassment. In England, during the Tudor era, it was said that noble women were instructed to bleed themselves deliberately with leeches, thinking it would balance their humors and shorten their menstrual cycle. Picture this: a queen lying still as leeches clung to her skin, sucking her blood, while she endured the agony quietly, knowing this was the price of perfection. But if the poisons and leeches weren't terrifying enough, the infections were worse. Because hygiene was nearly impossible, many royal women suffered chronic infections, fevers, and illnesses caused by the filthy conditions under those dresses. Bathing was rare. Sometimes, weeks passed without proper cleaning. To mask the smell of blood and sweat trapped under layers of heavy skirts, they doused themselves in powerful perfumes, thick and suffocating enough to make one dizzy. Yet still, the odors lingered. One of the most haunting aspects was how their clothing trapped them. Puffy dresses were more than fashion, they were prisons. These gowns had steel hoops, wooden frames, and corsets laced so tightly that breathing was a struggle. Once dressed, it could take an army of maids nearly an hour to undress them. During their periods, this became a nightmare. They couldn't change easily, so they sat for hours, even days, with blood-soaked rags pressed against their bodies. Many developed painful sores and raw skin, but to complain meant facing ridicule. Worse still were the public ceremonies. Imagine being a royal bride on her wedding day, enduring not only the crushing weight of her gown, but also unbearable cramps, nausea, and dizziness, all while hundreds of eyes stared at her. No matter the pain, she had to smile and play her part flawlessly. Some accounts even describe fainting spells mid-ceremony, blamed on tight corsets rather than the truth. The sheer agony of menstruating in silence. In France, during the reign of Marie Antoinette, rumors spread of blood-soaked petticoats being hidden away in palace closets, hastily discarded by maids too ashamed to wash them in public view. These whispers became scandal fodder for enemies of the crown, who used even these private matters as weapons in political rivalries. And what about royal pregnancies? Ironically, the only time menstrual blood was openly discussed was when it stopped. Periods weren't celebrated for their natural cycle. They were seen only as proof that a woman hadn't yet conceived an heir. The absence of blood brought relief, not because of health, but because it meant she had done her duty and was carrying a child. Until then, each cycle was a reminder of failure, wrapped in pain and secrecy. Why now? You see that the glittering world of royalty was nothing but a gilded cage, hiding suffering behind jewels and silks. These women endured agony in silence, trapped in clothes designed to please the public eye but torture the body. They drank poisons, wore blood-soaked rags, endured humiliating assistance from servants, and risked deadly infections, all because the truth of their humanity had no place in a royal court. When we look back at portraits of queens and princesses, we see serene faces, perfect posture, and effortless beauty. But behind those smiles were clenched jaws, twisted stomachs, and aching bodies weighed down by expectations. Their reality was one of silent endurance, masked behind perfume and pearls. And maybe that's the most disturbing truth of all, that in the pursuit of elegance and power, royal women paid the price with their own comfort, dignity, and even health, because their pain was invisible and their suffering was never allowed to stain the polished surface of their world.